there. Thank you very much, Mrs. Starmer. It's a great privilege to have you here with us. You have given us a comprehensive overview of the situation of family farming in the US, some of the tools that exist, and some of the innovations to deal with challenges, upcoming challenges, such as climate change. You are in the next panel. So it is a great pleasure for me to invite the following panelists to join the podium. Jake Carter, business person, farmer from the southern Belle farm. Roger Johnson, president of the National Farmers Union. Chris Policinski, president, chief executive officer, Land O'Lakes. Hannah Smith-Brubaker, also a business person, farmer, Village Acres Farm. And the panel is moderated by Asma Lateef, director of Bread for the World Institute. Please, the panel is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully this panel will reflect on some of the challenges that Elanor laid out, and also the opportunities to leverage family farming to address issues like hunger, which affects 1 in 6 people in this country, and climate change. So this first question really is a question for you all to reflect on from your own perspectives. What are the challenges of family farming in the US, and what kind of policy or institutional responses are needed to address these challenges? And I'd like to start with the farmers first, perhaps Hannah, and I'd love your thoughts, particularly as a woman farmer, on this question.
So if we accept that local markets, centralized distribution systems, food hubs are a vital area for agricultural growth. If we think about the typical skills of women and their ability to network and be in contact with each other, be in communication with each other, what I think we bring to the table has to do with relying on each other. We certainly cannot survive as farmers without relying on each other. And one thing that's been very important for my family, we are 3 generations working together on our farm, has been to be very conscious about farm transition planning in everything that we do. We are now 4 years into monthly farm meetings and just now transitioning from my partner's parents to our full-time management of the farm, and that very much involves our children. But having the resources available to make land accessible to our children, to be able to formally transition farms, because there's so much in our local communities and in our families, that hands-on knowledge that's so important to pass on, and we don't want to miss that opportunity.
Great. Jake?
Okay, well, first of all, it's an honor to sit on the panel with all of you. And one of the things that Elanor touched on was know your farm or know your food, and that's something that really hits home to my family. We're just south of Atlanta, and one of the other panelists a few moments ago mentioned that in rural areas, people are moving into urban areas, and on our farm, it happened quite the opposite. We had the urban areas move into rural areas, and being a 7th generation farmer on our farm, we had to adapt and change. And what we're doing now on our farm is educating the consumer, which I feel is a very important task to do. We're a former dairy farm, and we get to educate them daily. In fact, right now, as we speak, there's about 600 school students there on our farm that are learning about the process of milk for the very first time. So we feel very honored to be able to share our agriculture heritage with them. So that's a challenge and an opportunity both that we've had on our farm.
Great. Roger, why don't we go to you?
Sure. I think there are lots of challenges, but I think for our membership, and we represent about 200,000, mostly family, small and mid-sized family farmers around the country. Our membership base is mostly in the Midwest, but we've got members in all over the country. The challenges are the ones that have always been challenges for agriculture. It's price, it's access to market, it's how do you make money when in the face of some of the enormous weather events that we face, whether it's droughts or it's natural disasters, or floods or tornadoes, or you name it, those kinds of things. And so I think those are the challenges that are always going to be with us in agriculture. Maybe a bit later, I want to talk a little bit about our history and maybe some of its applicability to some of the issues that we heard on the earlier panel. But I think those are the challenges. Markets, weather. I mean, farmers, most of my life I've been a farmer in North Dakota, and then I came out here more recently to Washington, D.C. to head up the National Farmers Union. Most of us as farmers, we talk about the two big things all the time when we get together in coffee shops. It's government and weather. You know, those are always the challenges.
Christopher, the previous panel talked a bit about cooperatives, and cooperatives obviously are a way of helping farmers, family farmers deal with challenges. Could you speak a little bit more?
Yeah, I think it directly relates to the first question. First, I want to underline what Elanor had said earlier, that in the U.S., in the U.S.-specific conversation here, most farms in the U.S. are family farms. So 86% of the farms in the United States meet, I think, the FAO definition of family farms, which is an owner and a spouse. And another 11%, plus or minus, have their own hired labor. So we're talking about farms of all shapes and sizes in the U.S. that meet the definition of family farms. If you're talking about smaller family farms, I think cooperatives play a vital role, because the two challenges I think smaller family farmers face are market access. How do they aggregate their supply, their production, in a way that gives them a voice in the marketplace to get a fair price? And secondly, related to that, how do they aggregate their demand to get inputs, access to inputs at a fair price? But then the second large challenge that I think small farmers face is productivity and the need to be more productive. We often think of ag productivity in terms of very large farms, and that's accurate. But productivity at every level is important to be able to compete in today's marketplace, because while we want to talk about U.S. farms, it's really a global marketplace, which puts pressure even on local markets. And how do you drive productivity in all sorts of ways into the marketplace? Small farms, and it might be adopting some new technologies around precision ag and how we can map different soil types very effectively to show where the most productive land is and how to manage that. Because I think there are some great technologies that are going to make productivity tools much more accessible to small farmers.
Great. Elanor, you spoke a bit about this in your opening remarks, but are there additional thoughts you have, especially around policy and institutional response?
Sure, yeah, I'll be quick, but I also just want to recognize that this is actually National Month of the Cooperative, so it's a good moment to be thinking about co-ops. It's great to see Chris here. I agree with everything else that's been said, and I'll just add two additional thoughts. One, a huge challenge is access to land, both in our traditional farming areas, which is why succession planning is so important, and also in the areas around our urban communities. And so as we look at local and regional food systems, figuring out ways to preserve the farmland around urban places is very, very critical. And that's someplace where policy can play a huge role. So our Natural Resources Conservation Service has a farm and ranch land protection program that's very engaged in helping preserve some of that farmland. And I think making sure that the farms that are on that land are viable and can stay in business is really, really critical. The other challenge and opportunity I'll touch on is infrastructure. So we have national and international infrastructure systems that are very, very efficient, but we are not very good at getting food from a farm to a local community. It's surprisingly challenging. And so that's another place when we as USDA are engaged all across all of those areas, but particularly as we're looking at more sort of smaller scale regional infrastructure, there's an opportunity to leverage our grant and loan programs for things like processing, food hub aggregation, and distribution networks. And that's a place where there's a lot of really innovative thinking going on both in and outside of government.
And very important to local food security issues as well. Roger, is there an ideal farm size, family farm size, and how do you, when do you what is the best model in a way, and how do you address those sorts of issues, particularly in terms of meeting food security and environmental, reducing the environmental footprint of farms?
There's an ideal farm size for every individual. There is not an ideal farm size for society to dictate. And I think those are two really very different things. And in this country, we have, as Elanor discussed, a wide range of farm sizes. And I think there's also another piece of what you talked about. If you listen to her closely, we have more farmers that are very, very large in this country and more farmers that are very, very small in this country. And we have a shrinking middle, a rapidly shrinking middle. And that concerns us because a lot of our membership is sort of in that middle, in the shrinking middle. Although the fastest growing area of our membership is, as you might expect, it's the smaller farmers because there are so many more of them. And we're seeing more interest in sort of connecting farmers to consumers. And that's one of the really neat things about this Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food project is that that connection is being, it's sort of officially sanctioned now, and before it really wasn't. The ideal farm size is what fits everybody. We were organized more than 100 years ago, and most of our forefathers that are involved in organizing the National Farmers Union focused on the two big issues that Chris and others have mentioned. It's how do farmers get access to inputs at an affordable price in a competitive marketplace, and how do you have a place to market at a reasonable price, at a competitive price, okay? And so much of our formative years were actually involved in organizing cooperatives. And it is, I was so pleased to hear the earlier panel talk about all of the effort that needs to be spent in that area, because that is really, it is, the cooperative business model is what I think of as being the self-help business model. It's a group of businesses, farmers, who are getting together to create another larger business to provide those things that they need to do a better job in their business. And that's collecting all of those inputs, aggregating the output so that there can be a good marketplace for it. And to me, the ideal size is somebody that can fit in any of those spots.
Great. Hannah, did you want to comment?
If I might just add to that, to me, the ideal farm size is whatever size is going to allow you to survive. And on our farm, what we've done is try always to mitigate risk through diversification. Whether it's diversifying what we grow, which markets we go to, how we get things there. Half of our farm business is through a community-supported agriculture program, direct farm-to-consumer trade. The other half is through an organic growers cooperative that markets to the urban areas. And so whether it's through making sure that we have conservation practices installed, making sure we have lots of people working on the farm that have a diverse set of skills, that there are ways that our children can be involved, that diversification to mitigate risk so that we can be around is what I would say is key.
Great. Jake, I wanted to go back to you. What led you into farming, and what do you think needs to be done to make farming more attractive to younger people?
Well, first of all, my dad made me get into farming. You know, I think you're a product of what you grow up around. And actually, I grew up obviously on a farm, and I went to school. I was going to go business. But there's just something in our blood, or just you just can't leave it. I can't really explain it. You know, who in their right mind would want to work a 5 to 9 job instead of a 9 to 5 job? I can't explain that, and some people call us crazy, but it's just something that is sort of in our blood and want to come back to. But certainly thankful I did. It's a wonderful place to raise a family, and And the second part of your question was what can attract more young people. Here next week, I'll be attending the FFA convention. I know we spoke about that a minute ago. There'll be 60,000 youngsters who are just fired up about agriculture and just the wonderful opportunities that they have. It may not be directly with farming, but all of the associated farm jobs there, and technology. I mean, these days, youngsters, what better way to implement technology than young folks coming along? So I think there's a lot of wonderful opportunities there.
Are the issues around or the expansion of interest in organic foods and locally produced foods an incentive for young farmers?
I certainly think there's a niche there with organics. Our family, we still farm conventionally, but I certainly believe that there are niches there for organics, and I think she may be able to speak more to that, but I certainly think there's a certainly niche for that.
Chris, are the cooperatives you're working with engaging young farmers at all? Or?
Yeah, I think these comments, as I listen to them, are really connected in your previous question on size of farm. What's the optimal size, and how do you get young farmers more involved? They're connected in a sense. First, we use one or the other too much in our thinking about agriculture, large farms or small farms, farms that tend to use technology or niche the market. And the reality is we need all of it. We need large farms to produce abundant food in a high quality, low cost, increasingly sustainable way. We need smaller farms to niche the market, figure out what the next boutique crop is, to keep rural communities vibrant, to be innovation engines, and to get farmers engaged, young farmers engaged in farming. Because how do large farmers get that way? They start out as small farmers. And go back to what Elanor said, 90-some% of our farms in this country are family farms of all sorts of sizes. And large farmers aren't born, they're grown. So it's vital that we have small farms as an entry point, as innovation engines, as areas to keep rural communities vibrant, so that large farmers have a place, medium farmers have a place, small farmers have a place to send their kids to school and socialize. That's the power of farming in the U.S., and that's what we've got to keep our eye on, being more inclusive in our discussion about farming in the U.S., using the word "and" instead of the word "or" more frequently.
Thank you. Hannah, could you talk a little bit about how what you've done within your community and how you are helping address some of the food needs among the vulnerable populations?
So our farm mission is to connect people to their food, the earth, and each other. And what this means for us that, much like you would envision a watershed, we call our community building on our farm a food shed. And we want to be looking, where are we not touching our community? How can we better provide food for vulnerable people? So we have a rule on our farm that anyone who wants to share in our harvest may have their share regardless of their income level. Many of our members contribute to what we call our community fund, and that's money that is available for anyone who wants a share to be able to access those funds. We also have tried very much to make fresh produce be available to our members who are accessing the nutrition title. And there are some serious roadblocks when it comes to rural communities. For one of my most important pieces of technology is my iPhone. And if I could process someone's EBT card using my iPhone, I could make much more produce available to people. And then I would say, lastly, in our chain of no waste, we produce very little waste on our farm. That when we have served our customers, when we've fed our family, we try as much as possible to be getting fresh produce, meats, egg, even dairy to our local food banks. All of those are part of that food shed perspective, making certain that people have access to fresh, healthy food.
Are other farmers in your community joining you in that effort?
Yes, yes. And through the National Farmers Union's efforts last year with collecting some data on how much produce our farmers are bringing to food shelters. In Pennsylvania alone, just surveying a few number of farms that are Farmers Union members, they contributed over 50,000 pounds of fresh produce to their local shelter.
In the previous panel, they talked a little bit about food storage issues as being a challenge in developing countries. When you're working with food banks here, is that an issue that you come up with?
It definitely is. I know that the largest food bank in our state has put a lot of effort into increasing storage capacity. There are many implications with the new Food Safety Modernization Act that have impacts on small farms having to do with storage. Because so much of our local community is Mennonite and Amish, we're one of the few farms that has the storage capacity, so we do a lot of storage and transportation for our neighbors, and that goes back to that sort of relying on each other, who has what resource.
Thank you. Elanor, I wanted to pick up on the point you made about the diversifying profile of the family farmer in this country. A lot of family farms also depend on migrant farm workers who are also amongst those who experience high levels of hunger. Could you speak a little bit about how policy is addressing this issue and what more needs to be done?
Yeah, and there's a significant amount of more that needs to be done. This is a huge, huge issue for the agricultural industry and for our country as a whole. When we look at immigration reform, it is badly needed. We have a lot of farms across the country that are struggling to find labor. And the president has, I think, been very strong on the need for this and the frustration that he is experiencing with being stymied in Congress in terms of the legislation. But he has found ways to do what he can outside of Congress to try to address some of those issues. But we need immigration reform legislation, and we need it quickly. I think that is needed for reasons of farm labor, but it's also needed as we look forward at who's going to be farming in the future and the opportunities for some of the folks who are currently farm laborers to become farm owners and farm operators. I mentioned that the number of Hispanic farmers went up by about 21% between 2007 and 2012, and that's a great sign. But we need to be bringing people out of the shadows and into the legal structure in order to help them take ownership over farms and become the new face of farming. So that's yet another reason why this is so critical.
Chris, would you like to come in on that?
Well, Elanor is exactly right. I mean, this is a vital issue for farms of all sizes, really. And it does relate to, in a funny way, the fact that we only have 1% plus or minus of America farming. You know, in our grandfather's generation, our grandmother's generation, a quarter plus of America farmed. That's not that long ago. So what happened on the farm, if you had a question about it, you ask around the dinner table. You ask a trusted aunt or an uncle. You ask a neighbor, because they were likely on the farm every day. So as it related to a labor issue, folks in the community knew this wasn't an issue for that farm. It was an issue for the community, for the country. And the debate here is stymied, to use the same word you did, because I don't think that folks realize how dire a situation this is. We do need immigration reform to support the continued great productivity story on farms, and it's got to happen. It's not a farm issue. It's an issue for the country and, frankly, beyond.
Roger, I wanted to, if you want to comment on this, please do, but I wanted to also touch on the issue of climate change, and perhaps other panelists could weigh in on this as well. What worries you, and what are the opportunities?
What worries me about climate change is climate change. You know, as I said earlier, I farmed most of my life in North Dakota, but I also served for 12 years as an elected official, as the state agriculture commissioner. And one of the things that, so I had a statewide perspective that I spent a lot of time focused on. In 1993, I remember this like it was yesterday, In eastern North Dakota, farmers burned probably 500,000 acres of wheat instead of harvesting it. It was a phenomenal crop. It looked like a bumper crop. But what happened was we had, in the 2 previous years, gradually changing weather patterns that basically set in on a permanent way. And instead of getting our spring rains and summer rains, the rains came in the fall. And so as wheat was flowering and about ready to set seed, you had rains, and that resulted in scab. Fusarium head blight is the more technical term for it. But basically, it's a disease that destroyed the seed. And so when farmers went out to harvest, they were just surprised, shocked at the vast areas of the state where it looked like there was a crop, but there was no crop. And so as they went out and started combining and got nothing in the hopper, finally decided, okay, the only thing you can do is light a match to it, because it's one of the ways of trying to destroy the inoculum so that you have less of a problem the following year. Fast forward to today. So at that time in the mid-90s, much of eastern North Dakota was wheat. It's the largest crop for many, many years, since really statehood, in fact. Today, it's almost all corn and soybeans. There's hardly any wheat grown in eastern North Dakota. And in fact, much of northern and western North Dakota is now moving out of wheat as well, for the same reason. Weather patterns have changed dramatically in my lifetime. And so we have to adapt. And farmers are going to be really good at adapting. Don't get me wrong. We are going to adapt very quickly because you have to. And you don't have the latitude of waiting to make the same mistake year after year after year. But that little story is being repeated all across the globe as we are seeing weather patterns change. They're becoming more erratic. Storms are becoming more intense. We have to do more and more things to become more resilient, to deal with this. And so some of the crop breeding things that have been done, one of the reasons that we've got corn and soybeans moving into that area is for the reason I just stated. But another one is because we've actually got much better seed that is available today. It's shorter seasons, more drought-tolerant varieties, et cetera. And so what worries me about climate change is that the change may begin to happen more rapidly. And we're going to have to deal with that.
You know, to build on what Roger said, I worry less about farmers' ability to adapt to climate change and grow crops in other areas. And the northern migration of corn is a terrific example. I worry more about the volatility in crop prices that will occur around weather patterns. That can be more disruptive to farmers, and farmers being able to run their operations at any scale profitably. So I do worry about volatility, price volatility that results from more volatile weather patterns. That's something I think we have to manage and have our eyes open very much to. I worry less about farmers' ability to adapt a crop to a changing climate. Farmers have been brilliant at that for a lot of years, and they're showing that they are still doing it.
Hannah, Jake, do you want to comment on this? No. Is there a role for policy to help farmers in this?
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, we do need to have policies in this country and around the world that are going to help us adapt and mitigate against some of these actions. I mean, we are learning more and more all the time about different ways of growing things, different practices that are going to make our soil more resilient, more able to withstand these kinds of shocks that come from climate change. And so we ought to be putting more money into research and development of those kinds of things. And then we ought to be thinking more carefully about the kinds of incentives that can be used for farmers to adopt those kinds of changes, whether it's conservation practices, a whole range of, somebody earlier talked about precision farming. A lot of the precision farming capabilities today tie very much into this adaptation piece of climate change, because you can do the precise things on that particular acre that are best suited to that acre, that are going to help to mitigate against some of the impacts of climate change. The final point I'd make is that about perhaps 5 years ago, National Farmers Union was the largest aggregator of carbon credits in the United States. We actually started a program at North Dakota Farmers Union, a voluntary program, a market-driven program, where farmers adopted these scientifically proven practices like no-till farming or certain kinds of grazing practices, et cetera. And in exchange for that, others in the marketplace who wanted to have to encourage that, paid for those practices and you scientifically demonstrated that there'd be a certain amount of carbon that would be sequestered, taken out of the atmosphere, stored. And that all went away when the Congress decided they weren't going to deal with the issue and the markets collapsed. But those kinds of things have value and can work sort of automatically if they are designed to be market driven.
If I could just build for a second, I absolutely agree. Public funding of ag research so that technology can be used to adapt to climate change is essential. Much of the debate around ag technology right now, the negative part of the debate, isn't about the safety of the technology. It's an intellectual property discussion. And there's a way to solve that. Fund public research in agriculture. It's not about the safety of the technology. It's about intellectual property, and there's a solution to that. The second thing, and I think it relates to my comments on climate change earlier, we need policy that provides a safety net to farmers. If there's going to be increasing volatility, we need it. You know, it's a biologic process. It's subject to whether it's the most capital-intensive industry on the planet, end to end. When you look at it, farmers tend to use debt. Put volatility into that without a safety net, and you've got a crisis. So we do need to have good ag policy around a safety net for farmers. It's not market distorting, but does help them manage through an increasingly volatile world, which I think is a certainty. It's going to be more, not less volatile as we look into the future.
The last panel talked a lot about nutrition and the role that agriculture can play in improving nutrition outcomes, especially for young children and pregnant women. Hannah and Jake, could you talk a little bit about sort of the incentives to grow or the opportunities to grow more nutritious foods and the market opportunities there?
Sure. I was so pleased to hear the terminology this morning. It's not just food security, it's nutrition security. One of my favorite examples is eggs. Yeah. We know through science that eggs from pastured chickens have 1/3 of the cholesterol, have a much more healthy balance of omega fatty acids, are higher in vitamin D than the case when eggs are coming from chickens that are exclusively grain-fed. So as a farmer who, one of our primary involvements with livestock is pastured poultry, when I know that I can bring to the marketplace an egg that's going to be nutritiously superior for my customers, I'm very proud of that. And there's certainly, people are seeking that out now. So as far as market access, that's a real benefit for me, having that science behind it, and it's a practice that I believe in and that there's a customer demand for.
Jake, do you have?
Well, I have to look no further than my tie to look at the strawberries to happen to think about the community that comes out, the need for fresh fruits and vegetables, to be able to pick them straight from the plant and to see where their food comes from, you know, with the blueberries or those sweet Georgia peaches that they love to pick straight off the tree, and learn about that while they're doing it. So, yes, we've seen a great increase in folks that are just really interested in nutritious fruits.
Where do you see? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in really quickly, because I think this is a great intersection of an opportunity in terms of nutrition and the issue of the disappearing middle of agriculture that Roger touched on. And And I do think that when we look at the disappearing middle, the challenge is really to identify the markets and the products that will work for that size and scale of agriculture. Things that aren't necessarily going to work for the very, very large farms, but folks that can do things at a scale that is obviously larger than the smallest farms. And institutional markets is a big opportunity there, whether it's schools, colleges, prisons, government buildings. I mean, there's all different kinds of institutions, but we're seeing a huge increase in interest. And I think you just spoke to that in terms of young people wanting to learn more about where their food comes from. We have an opportunity, I think, to connect some of those mid-sized farms that are growing a more diverse crop mix than some of our larger farms, but doing it at a scale that can supply institutions, and connecting them with those institutions gives them a market opportunity. And I think the policy lever here is the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, which was passed in 2010, created a new farm-to-school program at USDA. And so we've been doing both grants to help connect farms and institutions, and also a lot of guidance for school districts on how to source those products, supply chain work to help connect them, and other activities. And I think that's really important.
Jake, just wanted to go back to you. Where do you think your farm will be 35 years from now? Will your children be farming?
Well, I certainly hope so. I have two beautiful girls that I hope will enjoy farming as much as I do. And 35 years ago, I can honestly say that my grandfather would never have imagined that people would be paying us money to walk through a cornfield as he was running the dairy, or folks that would come onto our farm and genuinely think that their milk comes from the local grocery store, not from a cow. So I think the name of the game is adapt and change. When we get lemons to make lemonade, and always, because let's face it, farming is a business, and we have to treat it as such. So I think that as long as we have that mindset, I think that we'll still be viable in the future.
Hannah, how about you?
Well, I certainly hope that my children will be involved in our farm or in agriculture, perhaps on their own farm somewhere else. One of the things that's been important to us as a family is, some people would call it homeschooling. We call it life schooling on the farm. Our children are so involved in a day-to-day basis on our farm. At 16, my daughter does all the bookkeeping for our farm, coordinates our CSA, does all of our credit card processing. My son is the public face of meeting 200 families every week to give them their share. They learn their math, their English, their speaking skills through their day-to-day life. And I think if we've done anything in that historical effort to remove kids from farm and put them in school so that they're prepared for industry, we have to remember that we can't then expect that we're going to raise children for whom farming is truly in their blood and are the future. So providing ways that, students who are in public school, that their vo-tech classes are not just in a building somewhere, but actually physically on farms, and value that as a culture. Very important for our future.
Elanor had mentioned the Farm Bill that passed this year. Chris, maybe you could talk a little bit about what was in the Farm Bill that pleased you.
Well, I'll be very specific with respect to the dairy program in the Farm Bill that went to a safety net that was an insurance-based program and insured margin, not a fixed threshold. It gets back to this notion that farmers deserve a safety net. These are biologic processes. They're subject to weather. We're seeing more volatility, not less. They're capital intensive. Farmers do deserve a safety net. But by moving to a insurance-like program that insures a margin, not a price support, you have an infrastructure that can evolve not to serve the price support program, but to serve the marketplace, and increasingly a global marketplace, which I think is good for U.S.-based dairy farmers. We can think more about exporting goods. And you create a program that the government subsidy can be dialed up or down, depending upon society's wish. I think that was a great step forward to preserve a vital safety net, but to do it in a way that politically, folks would say, okay, this makes sense to us. Because the 98% of America that don't farm, 99% of America that don't farm, they aren't black hat actors, but they have I think, a need to engage in farming more through things like you're doing, to understand what it's all about, and to realize that they do have a dog in the fight, and it is worth their support. But evolving our programs to be variable, we're not market distorting, I think was a very, very healthy part of this Farm Bill for dairy.
Roger, do you want to?
Well, I would agree with that, and I would extend it to other parts. I mean, we're a general farm organization, so we represent farms of all types, whether they're livestock or crop or specialty crop or particular kinds of, whatever. We represent them all. And there are a number of safety net programs that were woven into this Farm Bill that made it worthy of our support. We supported it aggressively. All across the board. But beyond just the support for production agriculture, I would highlight a couple of other things. The earlier panel talked about the importance of sort of rural development. It's one thing to have farmers out there producing, but you need to have all those ancillary businesses that support farms and that farms in turn support. In the rural development title, provides a lot of support to build those kinds of things. There was an energy title in this Farm Bill that specifically put programs out there to encourage farmers to do, or to encourage rural America to do rural or renewable energy kinds of programs. And those are really very important. We spent much of the 90s in this country reacting to the devastation of the 1980s. In agriculture, it was a very difficult time. A lot of farms going out of business in the 80s. And in the 90s, we spent a lot of effort trying to do what we called value-added agriculture and build these sort of other value-added things. The one big success from that was all the renewable energy stuff that developed from it. And so I would underscore that as being very important as a win within this Farm Bill as well.
Elanor, did you want to add anything on the Farm Bill? Or?
I've said a fair amount before, so let us move
on. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to give the audience time to tee up their questions. And I will pose the last question to you all. So this event was to give farmers a voice. What is the main message that you'd like the audience to take away from this event? And I'll start again with the farmers. Hannah?
I would probably go back to what I said earlier. 2 points. One, that it's not just food security, it's nutrition security. And 2, mitigating risk through diversification. I've heard, I spoke early, I had the opportunity to speak earlier this week at the White House on women in agricultural leadership. And unfortunately, when people talk about organic farms, I often hear the boutique or niche market language. Our farm actually doesn't qualify as a small farm anymore. We're a mid-sized farm. We feed 200 families, most of their vegetable needs every week, year-round, and in addition, we touch another 1,500 plates of food in restaurants. That's all on 12 acres in production. You can grow a lot of food on a small amount of land if you've got the willingness to diversify.
Jake?
Well, I think the one thing I'll say very briefly is just, the landscape of agriculture is very broad. Obviously, we've talked today, it takes large farms, small farms like myself, so organics operations. But let's not forget about the consumer. It's very important. There's a lot of misconceptions about agriculture today in the minds of the consumer, and I feel like it's very important that we as farmers, I'm laying the blame on myself here, to educate the consumers.
Roger?
I guess I'd stay with that same theme, that it's really important that we, especially in this country where there are so few of us as farmers remaining, that we need to be cognizant of the fact that farmers and consumers, in fact, are intricately connected. And we need always to be reminding folks, and all these things that can be done to encourage folks in cities to do urban gardens, I just applaud every one of them, because every time somebody does that, they have a better connection to where their food comes from, and they understand some of the challenges of producing it and raising it. I think that's good for all of us.
Chris?
The power of and. We need to be a lot more inclusive in agriculture. We need to include the 98% that consumes food in our discussions about food, and not just the 1 or 2% that produce food. We need to stop talking about big or small technology-driven farms or farms that choose to use a different production technique and say, you know what, we need them all, maybe for different reasons. Mm-hmm. How do we find an authentic niche in the marketplace for those mid-sized farms? You know, the secret may be in output traits that are highly technology-driven. Well, that's a different take on it. We just need to think more inclusively when we talk about agriculture. And I think if we do, we'll keep that ecosystem that Elanor talked about that has sizes of all shapes and farms of all shapes and size that's made this farm economy so great here in America.
Elanor.
All right. I guess my message, and I promise this is not self-serving, is to both the agricultural community and the broader eating community, is that policy matters. It took us a very, very long time to get a farm bill, an unacceptably long time. I think we have one now, and I think for a lot of people there is there's a lack of understanding of how that massive piece of legislation and how this massive institution that's implementing it actually impacts our daily lives. But it does, and I think we've talked about some of the very specific ways here in terms of working on the ground on on-farm conservation and renewable energy, in terms of making sure that we have a farm safety net so that our farms aren't all going out of business when prices are really low, making sure that we have opportunities to create new infrastructure to connect farmers and consumers, impacting the types of foods that are eaten in our schools and in our institutions. All of those things depend on policy, and good policy depends on engagement. And so one of the things I'm so excited about in the innovations we've seen at USDA is our ability to engage more effectively with stakeholders from across the different communities and talking about how to make our programs work better. But that continued engagement is absolutely critical, and I would urge everyone to get involved.
That's a really good segue to questions from the audience. We will engage you now in a discussion, so please raise your hands. There's a question over there and over there.
Thank you. My name is Juha Marttila. I'm a farmer from Finland. Finland is a small country in the Northern Europe, as Alaska in the United States. What we are producing in Finland, we call it Arctic food. Thank you very much for interesting discussion. I agree indeed that there's no ideal farm size, but in real life we see that the optimal farm size is increasing all the time because of lower margins and increasing productivity pressures. Actually, more interesting question than ideal farm size is industrialization of agriculture. And when I'm talking about industrialization, I don't mean farm size or no technological development. It's a question. The question is who is the decision maker in the food chain, and what's the role of individual farmer? And actually, it's a question of vertical integration in the food chains. Tight vertical integration means we can see it in many countries, in many industries, and it means it's a system in which farmers are of course price takers. Production technology is given in many cases to farmers. They have to sign long-run contracts, and even animals are owned by buyers. And my question is, how do you see that kind of industrialization of agriculture and vertical integration? Is it a threat or possibility for family farmers? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I think that if you look at consolidation in agriculture, it literally has been going on since the beginning of time. So this is not a new trend. Farmers have been getting bigger, and a more successful farmer has been buying out their neighbor. I actually had McKinsey do this a few years ago and go back as far as they could, and it's actually a pretty straight line in terms of consolidation. That doesn't mean that there's not an entry point for smaller farmers. I think they're the vital lifeblood of innovation. I think we need to focus more on that. I also am very optimistic that technology, particularly technology around precision agriculture, will start to empower smaller and smaller farmers to take advantage of some of the productivity tools that were only accessible to very large farmers before. I can tell you, you talked about your iPhone. I've seen some things around, we have a third of our business is in precision agriculture, and we have some technology that can use satellite imagery to map biomass production on any size farm in real time and show any size farmer how to optimize their crop inputs, small, medium, or large. And if small farmers take advantage of that, which they will, I think they're going to have a greater voice in terms of being more productive. So I'm more optimistic than pessimistic about the role of small farmers, as long as they're the innovation engine and as long as they embrace new technologies like I described and others.
So just briefly, this is a big issue, this question of, I think part of what you're getting at is the idea of contract farming. There are good ways and bad ways of doing it, in my judgment. And one of the good ways of doing this is to do it through cooperatives. Farmers can, in fact, engage in contracts with themselves in their own owned businesses and have some sense of control over making sure that the terms are fair, that there's transparency, that everyone's being dealt with on the up and up. Not all contracts are done in that way. And so to Eleanor's point about the role of policy, that's where public policy ought to say what's permissible and what's not permissible in these kinds of contracts, so that you want to avoid the case where someone who is in a disadvantaged position is taken advantage of. And I think that debate about what happens with folks with agencies like GIPSA in the U.S. is one of the debates that we have about that. And there's a lot of work that's done on this. We are a member of the World Farmers Organization, and they just produced a big publication on contract farming around the world, and some of those details are discussed in there.
Other questions? There's one in the middle there.
Hi, I'm Kathy Ozer with the National Family Farm Coalition, and appreciated hearing both panels. And one of the issues that came up on the first panel, actually in both panels, was sort of the role of government and the role of policy. And the question came up about storage and also about pricing and the ability for farmers themselves to have more control over their harvest. And just wanted to raise that question back to this panel about what kind of policy options do folks see, especially right now where we're seeing the level of volatility and the collapse in prices at a time when input costs have continued to rise. And then also related to policy, and Roger just mentioned it about GIPSA, is that it's not just in the Farm Bill, but we're in an ongoing battle around appropriations and other issues to hold on to important wins of the past, such as country of origin labeling or other proposals where defunding has become a mechanism in our government to limit the ability of our government to take action. So just some comments on that.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure if this will specifically address your question, but there were two things going around in my mind with both of these questions. One is transparency in labeling. So of course, the country of origin labeling, we want as farmers to be able to clearly communicate to our customers where their food is coming from. National Farmers Union has done a tremendous amount of work in defending this very important initiative. And in other ways, whether it's through organic labeling or any of the other labeling, transparency. And that's even on my farm. We have an open farm policy. Anyone can come to our farm anytime to see what we're doing on our farm. The other piece has to do with prices, and I'm not as well versed in the commodity crops pricing system. But for me, as a farmer, why I choose to sell directly, I can choose to sell in the conventional marketplace and get 15 to 16 cents on the dollar, or I can sell directly to my customer and get 100% of that dollar. And often that means that I can bring my food to my community for even less than what I see it in the grocery store.
So if I could, National Farmers Union had a policy proposal in advance of this farm bill dealing with that very question that you raised about trying to bring policies to bear that might result in less price volatility, which is, I think, a growing concern. I think Chris mentioned it about one of the outcomes of climate change is that markets are going to be wildly swinging. That's always been the case in agriculture, and it's likely to be more so the case for a very simple economic reason. If you think about it, if you got enough food to eat, and somebody walks around with a plate of food and says, how much will you give for it? Your response is going to be virtually nothing. But if you're hungry and you have money, and somebody comes along with a plate of food and says what you would pay, you'll pay a lot more. It's a very fundamental principle. Some economists argue that the demand for agricultural products is sort of like the demand for insulin if you're a diabetic. It has zero value if you don't need it. It's worth a lot if you really do need it. And so we promoted that sort of a policy. It was not taken up by this Congress. Pretty much every economist in this town said, we got high prices, they're going to be here for a long time. And for those of you that aren't on the farm right now, let me just tell you that corn was probably $6 a bushel a year and a half, 2 years ago. Today, in my home state of North Dakota, it's less than $2 a bushel. I mean, anybody can raise corn for $2 a bushel. So this is a big problem going to be coming at us real fast. And I'm not sure that we've got quite the right policy mix to deal with it that's going to be affordable.
I'm afraid Roger's going to have the last word on that. As the previous moderator said, we could have gone on a long time on this discussion. Really want to thank you. It was a very rich discussion. Join me in giving this panel a round of applause.
Thank you very much. This was an extraordinary panel. It is my honor now to conclude this session. It has been an extraordinary dialogue with distinguished guests, experts, practitioners, policymakers from different backgrounds. You helped us to better understand the role of family farmer and of smallholder farmers in eradicating hunger, in protecting the environment, and in achieving sustainable development. This event offered an opportunity to share a wealth of experiences and insights and to discuss appropriate policies for scaling up innovation in family farming. Panelists came from different backgrounds: government, civil society, farmers, private sector, multilateral organizations, research. But they all share the same commitment to eradicate hunger in our generation, and our common belief that in order to achieve that, we need to work together in partnership to keep the dialogue going and to find common solutions. This event is part of this dialogue that we are seeking among different stakeholders, and there are new opportunities coming up, like the International Conference for Nutrition, ICN2, in November. What do we take home from this event? A lot of insights were gained, and if I were to concentrate on some, I will try to read the scribbles that I have put down here. We heard about concrete tools and innovations that benefit family farmers in developing countries and which can be scaled up. The key word in panel 1 was there is change in the air. Change about society, change about how agriculture is done, a new role for family farming, change in technology also. In panel 2, the recurrent word that I heard was inclusion. Include the family farmers in decision-making in investment and research decisions, to include all tools and options and the technologies that we have available because we need them all. There were some commonalities throughout the discussions. One is the importance of policies that was clearly recognized, the need to work together in partnership, the value of diversification. There were examples of joining forces like the need for cooperatives, which came up in both panels. And what is recurrent is that there is a future for family farming. On behalf of the organizers, National Geographic and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, I want to express our deep gratitude to the distinguished keynote speakers, moderators, and panelists for their generosity in sharing their time, their expertise, and knowledge. And I want to thank you all for participating in this event, because it shows your commitment to eradicate hunger and to relegate hunger to where it belongs, to the archives of history. I want to thank a great team, both of National Geographic and of FAO. I want to thank Caitlin, Bess, Ed, who is there, and from FAO, especially Gabe, Amy, and Livia, and a number of other volunteers who helped here. Also Nick, who supported this event throughout, for making this happen. It is an important event. Now, as you leave this auditorium, don't remember one hashtag: toast a farmer. So when you leave, don't forget to toast a farmer today to celebrate the International Year of Family Farming and the World Food Day to thank the family farmers for producing the food and taking care of the earth, of the planet. So have a safe journey back, and thank you again to all of you for coming. Thank you.